In this video, we will be looking at shape tools and shape builders. In our previous videos, we'd actually talked about how you can download Affinity Designer as a beginner. We've talked about when you download Affinity Designer, upon launch, what you get to see on the interface and the common tools you get to use. We touched base with the node tool, the pen tool. We talked about contour tool and some other tools. Today we're looking at the shape tools and most importantly, the commonly used shape tools. We'll also touch base with the pre-made shape tools in Affinity Designer. We'll look at how you can combine the shapes to make out something new, how you can edit the shapes using the modifier, and how you can make compound shapes going through the non-destructive routes. We'll also look at how when you have created your unique shapes, how you can store the shapes up either as an asset or as a precept. Then we'll narrow it down to how we can apply these techniques we have talked about to designing a flyer using the shape builder tool in Affinity Designer. If you are interested in this video, let's take a ride. Remember that initially in our previous section we had mentioned that this left hand side of this interface is where we can find our shape tools, which is basically what we'll be discussing today. We have the ones that we will commonly see, which are the rectangle tool, the ellipse tool, and the rounded rectangle tool. I'm not really sure why Affinity Designer had to, create this particular tool, rounded rectangle tool, as a tool when actually you can literally work on these edges and still get your rounded edge. So like I said, these are the common shapes at a glance when you access the shape tools on the left hand side of the Affinity Designer user interface. However, aside these common ones, Affinity Designer had also created what we call pre-made tools. And by pre-made tools, what we mean is these are shapes that had already been created and built into, Affinity Designer, and you can literally access those tools by coming down to the fourth symbol here within the shape tools, the fourth symbol here, and you would access that by this downward arrow key here. And with the downward arrow key, you'll be able to access all the other pre-made tools within the Affinity Designer from the shape tools. There's a set of tools you can find within the pre-made tools. We have the triangle tool, we have the diamond, we have trapezoid, polygon, star, double star, name it. A whole lot of tools at your disposal which you can make use of. Now, the good thing about these tools is that despite the fact that they are pre-made tools, you still have the ability, or you are at liberty to still edit or change the shapes, to further change your shapes with the use of what we call the modifier. Let's take, for instance, we would want to modify the star tool. This star tool, for you to modify, if you look at it critically, you will see three orange dots. Now these dots could be referred to as the modifiers. These three dots are handles to change the shape of how the star would look in case you chose to modify. Let's take, for instance, if we stretch or if we move these dots, you see we have changed the shape. We can still go forward and do this, and we can do this. So just by moving these three dots, we've been able to change the shape of the star tool into three different shapes. Now, same applies to the double star, same applies to the square star, same applies to the segments, and a whole lot. So at your leisure, you are literally free to explore these shape tools and how you would find them useful in the kind of work you are probably doing part-time. Don't forget, these pre-made shape tools can be accessed from this left hand side of the screen where you have the shape tools and where you have the particular icon with the particular tool with an eye and the downward facing arrow. So by literally keep clicking and holding on that particular arrow, you get to display these other tools which you could literally use for the design you're doing part time. Moving on, let's look at how we can edit shapes. Now, we've talked about the common shapes you see in Affinity Designer, and we talked about the pre-made shape built into Affinity Designer. Now, we've also talked about how you can modify these shapes with the help of modifiers. Now, let's take a shape and literally modify the shape. Let's pick from our pre-made tools. We have a donut, and we have let's say a rounded rectangle. Now let's change their colors. Let's give this a darker shade. Now we have two shapes. One is a pre-made shape and one is a common shape you can easily access amongst the shape tools. Now first off, we want to use the modifier to change what the shapes are looking like. So the first thing we do is double clicking on that particular shape. You would expose the handles you need, which are the two dots, to change the way the shapes look into your desired shape. Now when I drag, I can literally work on the inner circle. So let's say this is what I want. Now let's come to this. I can drag this and I would have this. This would literally come in handy when you're trying to create an infographics. Let's see what we can do with this common shape called the rounded rectangle tool. We've double clicked this shape to expose the orange dots that would allow us to distort or change the shape. By dragging downwards, we've literally changed the shape of the rounded rectangle into an ellipse. Isn't that amazing? And we can literally change it back to a rectangle without a rounded edge. Now that is putting your modifier to use. Now we want to see how we can now bring these two shapes together and begin to edit them by either combining them, dividing them, subtract, add, intersect, XOR, and the likes. Yeah, now this is how we go about it. Let's place these two together. When you select the two shapes you would want to work on, that is after you've modified the shapes to take the form you are happy with, you can now come to these tools up here to now decide what you want to do with these tools, and this is where these tools come into play: the add, the subtract, the intersect, the XOR, and the divide tool. Now when we click on the add tool, what the add tool does is it takes the two shapes and turn them into one shape. Watch. Now it has converted this shape, these two shapes, into one shape. Now this may be what you want, but for the sake of this video, we don't want to convert into one shape. We just want to show what happens. Now this in a way is like a destructive method of creating new shapes from two different shapes. Now we'll undo. Also selecting these two shapes, we can click on subtract, and this is what would happen. Now the layer above would mask out or cut out the part it occupies within the layer underneath it, and that's what happens. It subtracts from the layer underneath it. Let's undo. We can also go ahead and say we want to intersect. Now intersect does a calculation of where the two shapes meet and creates the shape formed where the two shapes meet. That's what we see here. And then we can also go on to do the XOR. And what the XOR does is it's at the point where the two shape meets, it kind of deletes. Now if you recall vividly, when we did the intersect, the point where the two shape meets where was extracted and the rest of the shapes were deleted. But the reverse is the case with the XOR at the moment. What the XOR does, it deletes the point where the two shapes meet and keeps the rest. So in a situation where that is what you want, now you have the two at your disposal. Now we can go on to divide the shapes, and when you click on divide, what happens is it automatically breaks the shape such that at the point where it intersects, it creates a separate shape that cuts into the already existing shape. So you can literally click on this and move it, and there you go. That's what the divide tool. I believe with this little illustration you now have an idea of how these two, particularly I think they called them the Boolean tool, how they work as regards to manipulating shapes. We've been able to look at the common shapes. We've been able to look at the embedded shapes like the built-in shapes in Affinity Designer, which I prefer to be called the pre-made shapes. We've looked at how we can modify shapes already created. We looked at how we can edit the shapes. Now it will be nice for us to also look at how we can combine shapes depending on the kind of design you're doing per time. You want to combine shapes at some point, and you want to go about the non-destructive route. Now oftentimes when you combine shapes, the two shapes involved take the form you desire, but underneath there are still different shapes that can be used the way they are, and you can easily move them around to even create further shapes, or create more different shapes out of what you had already created, or adjust it to further suit what you want if you're not satisfied with what you had already created. Let's look at how this can be created, how we work with combining shapes. Now, when you combine shape, I think they are referred to as compound shapes. When you combine shapes, you kind of create compound shapes. And how do you create compound shapes? You hold down your Alt key and you click Add. This way you have created a compound shape. Now from the look of things, it's looking like, oh, we have created a destructive shape, or we have gone through the destructive route. No, that's what's different between the add and the compound. Now if you look closely, the shape currently is looking like it's grouped, but however there are still two different entities that can still be moved around and positioned to take the shape you so desire. Having created a compound shape, we can further play around with the shape. What do we mean? We can bring into play, if you remember when we're talking about our node tool and our contour tool, that there's a whole lot of stuff the contour tool can bring to the table. One of such is when you click on the contour tool and you play around, this is what you can get. Now you see what you can get. You are literally editing the shape to take a different shape, and the funny thing is you can begin to move the shape around to create some amazing shape. So that's the beauty of the shape tool, in Affinity Designer, the flexibility that comes with manipulating your shape to take the form you so desire. So that is where combining shape comes into play, which oftentimes is the non-destructive route to manipulating shapes in Affinity Designer. Now, having looked at compound and combining shapes, now let's talk about how we can create and store shapes. You are working on a particular task and you notice that you would have to create the same kind of shape repeatedly, and you don't want to always create the shape each time you need to do it. Now, there are two ways to go about it. It's either you create it as an asset, that's one, or you create it as a preset, that's two. Now, let's go on to show how we can create a shape as an asset. Now, going back to the compound shape we had created before we moved on to the new topic. Now, this shape, we want to convert this shape into an asset. What do? We come to our assets tab here and we create a new category. Now, when we create a new category, it will automatically come as assets. We don't want it to be misidentified with other assets within that particular space, so we want to rename it to something we can remember. So let's call it new shape. Let's make it one word, new shape. Now automatically we have created this new shape. So what do? We can now add this shape to the assets category we have created by clicking add from selection. Remember, you must have selected this shape you created, and now we have the shape at our disposal. So we can literally come to asset 2 and pull our shape for use, and it will still retain its original elements or shapes. Now that's one way to go about storing or creating your own shape for reuse. Now another way to go about storing up shapes would be from our shape tools, creating a polygon. Let's say we have the tier. Now this tier tool, we want to create a precept called tier new, and we don't want to create a replica, because one thing about Affinity Designer is for you to create a shape precept, you must ensure that the shape you are storing as a preset does not already exist within the precept, so it has to be something new. So what do we do for us to create something new? We need to bring in the use of our modifier. Now modifying this tool, the shape, we want to create something quite different from what is already existing within our presets. So having created this, we can come to this button here named presets, and we can say manage presets. Now from manage presets, we can create a new category called my presets. Create. Now having created my presets, you close, then you come back to this and you say create presets. Create presets would mean you call this my tier presets, and you put it in your category my presets and you create. Now, with that being said, you have automatically created your own preset, and at different times you can call your presets, right? So to call your presets, you create a tier, and with the tier created, you can just immediately go to the preset you created, and boom, you have converted it to what you want. So in a way, this captures how the two different ways you can go about storing up your shapes. You can either store the shape as an asset where you can pull it in whenever you want to, or you can store your shape as a preset where each time you draw a polygon or a pre-made shape, you can automatically change it to the shape you intend by accessing the preset you already created from that particular shape. Now that we've talked about creating and storing your shapes, let's go on to look at how we can put these to good use. I had initially created a flyer using this technique, so I want us to create a replica of this flyer right now. So this is the flyer I had created, simple flyer I had created using applying these techniques we had already mentioned. Yeah, so we're going to replicate this flyer. Watch me as we move along. Okay, now first thing first will be to create a rectangle. Remember, these are the common, I'm accessing one of the common shape tools we have on the left hand side of the screen, which is the rectangle tool. And here we go. Let's make use of a dark shade this time around so that we can create a contrast, and just so that we can also know that we don't have to just use the white shade, we can also use the dark shade to create whatever we want to create. Now, having created this rectangle, now the next thing to do, create the different circles we have within this shape. So right now, let's go to our ellipse tool. You see, we are accessing the second most accessible shape tool on the left hand side, and we hold down shifts and we drag. Here we go. Let's change the color so that we have a bit of contrast. But something you need to know, we can literally hide this or mask the circle behind inside the rectangle. Let's redo this. So if we need to mask this, all we need to do is come to this place and click insert inside selection. Now we'll click this ellipse, and as you can see, it's already masked into the rectangle. Now we've created that. Let's create other smaller ellipses so that we, of course, we have this, and I will just duplicate by holding down your Alt key on Mac, no, on an Option key on Windows. You can duplicate your circles. Okay, it's not exactly what we want, but as soon as we proceed, you will begin to understand what we're doing. So we have this circle is slightly big. This is a bigger circle. Same with this. It's a bigger circle. Okay, now remember when I mentioned the non-destructive routes? So we want a situation where we can literally create the shape on the left hand side without destroying the elements that will make up the shape. Right? Now, remember when I mentioned non-destructive route, we actually talked about compound shapes. I'm going to highlight all the circles I've created, I'm going to hold down the Alt key on my Mac and Option in Windows, and I'm going to create Add. By so doing, we have created a fresh shape from non-destructive approach. Now we'll go to our contour tool, and what do? We can do this. Now that we can do this, we can literally go to each of these elements and begin to play around with them. There you go. Same applies to this. See, isn't that amazing? You literally increase this, then you pull it down. There you go. As you can see, we've been able to create these same shapes without completely altering the original elements or shapes that make up the final one we're looking at the moment. We're going to pull elements from what we already have or paste. So let's work with this. They're actually not the same size, but we can make it work anyways. Oh yeah, there you go. Okay, so this is more like a different approach to what we already had. So we can literally move. Let's create the text. Edit. Insert filler text. 16 area regular. Let's make it white. Let's take this up, make this 36 bold. A bit. Talk about the numbers. Let's do 34990 3456 333. So remaining this element here. So yeah, come to this and we create. Come to this place. Create. Should come behind this rectangle. We have created a flyer using shape tools and applying the non-destructive method. I hope you've been able to learn something from this video. If you did, please like and subscribe to my channel. Click the notification bell so that you would know when I put up new videos. So that is how to use shape tools in Affinity Designer. Thank you.